we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist worldwide.
Before we get into tonight's podcast with tonight's special guest, next week we're going to try something different. I'm going to be doing the speaking and book tour, going to be on location. We're going to be at St. Louis, Missouri, Monday night, April the 15th. We're going to be in Springfield on Tuesday, and then Branson on April the 17th, Wednesday night. And since I'm not going to be in the studio to do an actual in-studio podcast, I thought, wouldn't it be fun to take the show on the road? What if we did the radio podcast with a studio audience? And I haven't done that with this show ever, and I thought it might be kind of fun. So I checked in with the folks in St. Louis, and on Monday night after the presentation, I think we're going to see whoever wants to hang out. We're going to do a kind of a live audience radio podcast in St. Louis. I don't have the infrastructure or really the inclination to try to put it on the air live on Monday night. Handling the PowerPoint and all the other things is too much to manage. I'm just going to record what happens Monday night and then air it at our regular time on Tuesday. So that should be fun. And I'm not taking a theme or a topic or anything like that. I'm not going with anything really prepared. I think we'll just let the audience determine what we want to talk about. They'll have a microphone, can ask questions, make comments. We can challenge each other. We can exchange stories. We can do whatever. And I think it's going to be a different kind of a show and a lot of fun to do. So that'll be next week on Tuesday night at its regular time. And it'll be sort of something that I record Monday and pipe in while I'm on the road. It should be a lot of fun. I hope you can join us for that. Tonight, joining us is a very special guest. She's been writing professionally since 1989, and she writes about a ton of different stuff, including atheism and sexuality, LGBT issues, politics, pop culture, and a whole lot more. She might be best known, at least these days, for her book called Why Are You Atheists So Angry? 99 Things That Piss Off the Godless. And she joins me tonight for the podcast. Greta Christina, thank you so much for being my guest.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I don't want to go all Barbara Walters on you right off the bat, but let's do a little biography, okay? I mean, tell me where you're from and how you got started, okay?
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in Chicago and moved to the West Coast to go to college and landed on the West Coast and pretty much fell in love and never left. And I've been writing for many, many years. I've been writing professionally since 1989. Mostly when I got started doing writing, I was mostly doing sex writing. I was writing for On Our Backs magazine, which was this very groundbreaking lesbian sex magazine, sex magazine by lesbians for lesbians about lesbians. And that's kind of how I got started doing any kind of professional writing, and just kind of took it from there. I mean, when you start out with sex writing, you pretty much, there's nowhere to go in terms of being willing to break boundaries and cross lines and so on. So from there, writing about politics and writing about religion, it was, it was kind of a natural progression.
When did you start writing for, if I may, On Our Backs is one of the best magazine titles. Everybody wants to know more. On Our Backs, really? What's it about? When was this? Was this late 80s?
Late 80s. I started writing for them in 1989, and I don't remember exactly when I stopped, but I worked for them for several years.
So what are we talking about? Is it erotic fiction? Is it analysis of sexual issues of our age and our country? What was it?
All the above. I mean, it was basically, at its core, it was porn. It was erotic fiction and erotic photography, but it also had commentary, it had news, it had, analysis of issues having to do with lesbian sexuality and so on. And the main reason for it actually was to just be, hey, here's sexual entertainment for lesbians that's actually, that's by lesbians, and that's not, sort of straight men's idea of what lesbians do and not made for men. And, there were certainly a lot of men who enjoyed the magazine and read it and liked it, but that wasn't who the audience was for. And
they just read it for the articles. Yeah, I know this argument. I've heard it many, many times, Greta.
Huh?
You tackle sexual issues. This isn't a show about sexuality, but it's obviously it's sort of a compelling start, so I'll stick with it. You tackle, without fear, sexual issues. And are you seeing then, over the last couple of decades, you are seeing really a lot of the boundaries, a lot of the restraints, a lot of the taboos and restrictions are starting to lift in the language about sexuality here in the USA, because it's something that has really been a problem for a long, long time, correct?
It's been a problem for a long time. I mean, centuries, really, obviously. And again, this ties in with religion in very obvious ways, because religion, and especially organized religion, has been one of the main forces for pointless sexual repression for centuries, really. And so to a great extent, my sex writing was a natural lead in to starting to write about religion and atheism. And I think that that's true for a lot of atheists. There's a lot of atheists who their starting point for beginning to question religion was questioning religion's ideology about sex. So I do think, to answer your question, I do think that there's been a lot of progress. It hasn't been total unilateral progress. There's also been a lot of regression. Things like the abstinence-only sex education in the schools, that's a fairly new development. Increasing chipping back of abortion rights. Abortion is still legal in the United States, but the religious right is being very effective in getting abortion rights kind of chipped away at around the edges, making it more and more difficult to get access to. So there has been a lot there. It hasn't been unilateral progression, but there certainly has been a lot of progress. I mean, the most obvious area where we see that is, of course, is gay rights, and particularly same-sex marriage, and also just the general acceptance of same-sex relationships. And there's something that I'm seeing a lot of among younger people. I do a lot of speaking on college campuses. I'm on the Secular Student Alliance. Yay, Secular Student Alliance. I'm on their Speakers Bureau, and I give a lot of talks on college and university campuses. And one of the things that I'm noticing is that among college and university students, there's a much wider acceptance of polyamory, non-monogamy, open relationships, much more so than in my generation. And, it's just kind of assumed, now it's not assumed that everybody's going to be non-monogamous, but it's assumed that that's an option and that that's something that you need to discuss. And that's something that I think is fairly new, and I would certainly be happy to see that become more mainstream. I'm not one of those people who think non-monogamy is right for everybody, but I do think that it's right for a lot of people, and that there's a lot of people who it would work for if they knew that it was an option, if they knew that it was something that could work and that people have done successfully and so on. So,
you think this greater zone of comfort among young people is a byproduct of the, say, lack of religiosity in the younger generation?
I certainly think that's a big part of it. I mean, I realize, when I say, hey, the young people I run into, they're so much more sexually open than my generation. Of course, the young people I'm running into are atheists. And so, it's not exactly a, random sample. But yes, I do think that the breakdown of religiosity has a lot to do with it. And there's something I don't know if you're familiar with the sex and secularism study that Daryl Ray and Amanda Brown did a couple of years ago.
No, I was not asked to participate, so I have no idea what you're talking about.
This is actually this very large internet-wide study that was done a couple years ago, and anybody could have, you could have participated if you wanted to. It was like over 10,000 people responded. Daryl Ray and Amanda Brown were doing research on how people's sex lives change when they leave religion. And, so they basically queried what turned out to be over 10,000 atheists, agnostics, free thinkers, etc., about their sex lives currently as non-believers and then before they left religion, if they had once been religious. And what they found was really interesting. They found that what people actually do sexually doesn't change that much when people leave religion. People are just as likely to masturbate and to have extramarital sex and to have gay sex, to enjoy pornography and so on. They're just as likely to do all those things when they're atheists as when they're religious believers. But what changes is that they feel better about it, and they don't have this kind of pointless shame about activities that are entirely ethical and entirely consensual, but that they were taught by their religion God frowns on. And so, yes, I definitely think that breaking down religion is a big part of it. But I think that it's kind of one of those chicken and egg cause and effect things, because I think that certainly people questioning religion also leads them to question religion's sexual ethics and to replace them with, ethics that are actually based on ethics, as opposed to these kind of taboos written thousands of years ago. But so people questioning religion leads them to question religion's sexual rules. But the opposite of that is also true. One of the main things that leads people to begin to question religion is that they're starting to question religion's sexual ethics. When you ask religious atheists what led them to leave religion, a lot of times what they'll say is that at least one of the factors is, well, the church I went to is really homophobic, but I'm not homophobic and I don't want to be homophobic, and I have gay friends and I support them and I love them and I think they should have equal rights, and why is my religion teaching me that that's a bad thing? And similarly, restrictions, rules about women and sexual double standard between women and men and so on. These kinds of things are a lot of what lead people to question religion. So it's kind of a snowball effect. The more we question religion's sexual rules, the more we question religion, and then the more we question religion, the more sort of the pointless religious sexual morality breaks down and gets replaced with a more actual reality-based and ethics-based sexual morality.
Talking here with Greta Christina. Were you always an atheist? Were you ever immersed in religion as a child?
Well, I have a somewhat unusual story with that. I was raised agnostic. My parents were both agnostics, and so I was raised a non-believer, and I just didn't think about religion very much. But when I went to college and started taking a lot of drugs and such, I picked up a lot of New Age religions. So I never had conventional religious beliefs, but I picked up a lot of belief in things like reincarnation and tarot cards and astrology and, the cosmic consciousness of the universe and all that woo stuff. And it took me, I did have to go through a process of letting go of that and relinquishing that when I was, letting go of those beliefs and becoming a non-believer and an atheist. And
was it that you were sampling at the buffet, sort of trying everything out to see if it worked, and nothing did, so you just rejected all of the woo altogether? Is that how it worked?
Well, it was a little bit more specific than that, actually. I mean, what led me to question and eventually let go of the woo was a combination of factors. Some of it was starting to read more science, and especially the science of neurology and neuropsychology and how the mind works, and realize, a lot of this stuff that I've just kind of taken for granted about the soul and so on, there's not really any good evidence for it, and the science doesn't back it up. And, I was very interested in how the mind works, and so once I started looking at the actual science and evidence about how the mind works, that led me to question a lot of things. And one of the main things actually that led me to start questioning was I started reading the Skeptical Inquirer. And I was interested in the Skeptical Inquirer because there were a lot of issues that I already agreed with it about, things like Bigfoot and homeopathy and vaccine denialism and so on. And so I started reading it and realizing, the same reasoning that leads people to question Bigfoot and homeopathy is the same reasoning that leads these same people to question any kind of spirituality, any kind of life after the death, any kind of soul. So I was going through this questioning process anyway, and the specific incident that led me to let go of my spiritual beliefs was that I had surgery, and it was pretty minor surgery. I broke my arm and I just had to have pins set in it, but I had to have general anesthesia. And I don't know, have you ever had general anesthesia?
Yes, I have.
So you know what it's like. You're just gone. You're obliterated.
Totally gone.
You are totally gone. It's nothing like being asleep. When you're asleep, there's kind of some vague sense of time having passed and you having been around. Yeah. When you're under general anesthesia, you are just gone. And they could have when I woke up, they could have told me that I'd been out for 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years, and I would have believed them. I had no sense of time passing or having a self during that time. And so I really kind of had to accept, if just a small amount of a chemical in my brain can obliterate my consciousness and my selfhood that thoroughly, what makes me think that my consciousness and my selfhood are going to survive me being dead and my brain rotting in a grave somewhere? And I just realized, okay, I just have to accept this. Whatever the mind is, it's produced by the brain and it's not supernatural. And I just, that was kind of the final nail in the coffin. And this is actually something, I don't know if you've run into this, but I found that when I talk with atheists about their process of leaving religion, that kind of story is really common. It's very rarely like this one incident that happened that made them suddenly let go of religion. It's often a process. It's like, wow, I started reading the Bible and started having questions about it, and I started talking with my religious leaders, and they couldn't answer my questions very well. And then I started reading science, and it was giving me better answers. And I started talking with atheists, and they gave me some arguments against religion. It's like it's a process. And I think that that's really common. And so this is veering off a little bit from your question, but I think it's an important topic. I think there's a lot of atheists who are very defeatist about trying to persuade believers out of religion. They're like, why do you bother arguing with believers? They never change their mind. And that's certainly almost always true in the course of one argument. You know, you're not going to persuade somebody out of their religion during one argument on Facebook. It's not going to happen. But you can be part of their process. You can be like another crack in the foundation, or you can be the final nail in the coffin or whatever. So I think that was certainly true for me, and I think it's true for a lot of atheists. It was very much a process of beginning to question and beginning to see evidence that contradicted my beliefs, and then finally having this experience that made me ultimately let it go.
Did you experience personally discrimination as a non-heterosexual for religious reasons?
You know, not really. You know, the certainly in my own community, I never experienced homophobia for religious reasons because I live in San Francisco, and I've lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for many decades now. And, you know, and I'm not saying that nobody in the Bay Area is ever homophobic at all, but, you know, the overwhelming culture here is very accepting and very supportive. And that includes the religious culture. Christianity here tends to be very progressive. Judaism tends to be very progressive. You know, there's a lot of spiritual but not religious, and there's a lot of New Age belief here. Now, what is true is that in a larger sense of being a U.S. citizen, I've certainly experienced discrimination because there's laws that say I can't get married to my wife. And those laws are largely driven by religious bigotry. And so, you know, locally in my own community and among my own friends, I didn't experience that. But, you know, certainly as a larger member of the culture and as a citizen of the United States, I've certainly experienced that.
I see and hear people come up to me all the time, and they draw the parallel between going through the process of coming to terms with their own non-belief and coming to terms with their own sexuality. The two really have a lot of parallels.
They're very similar. I think that there are some important differences, and I'll talk about those in a second. But yeah, I do think there's a lot of similarities. And in fact, I think that the atheist movement has a lot to learn from the history of the LGBT movement, because there are so many similarities between the two communities. But the LGBT community is like a few decades ahead of us in terms of being very visible and very vocal and very activist and gaining more mainstream acceptance. And so I think we have a lot to learn from the history of that community. I do think that there are some important differences, and one of them is that your sexual orientation, that's something that we're probably born with. That's what the overwhelming evidence seems to suggest. You know, whether it's genetic or in utero effects or whatever, for whatever reason it is, people are probably born more or less gay or straight or bisexual. And if we're not, then that orientation seems to be formed very, very young, and it's not really malleable. It's not something that you can change. You know, if you're bisexual, as I am, you know, you might slide up and down the Kinsey scale throughout your life and be a little more attracted to men or a little more attracted to women. But it's not really something that you can change or control just by thinking about it. Whereas atheism, it's an idea. It's not like an identity that you're born with. It's an idea about the world. It's a conclusion you've come to about the world. So it's not an exact parallel. And obviously people do change their mind. People come out as change their mind about being religious and become atheist. And occasionally it happens the other way, although that's not very common. So there's not an exact parallel. And I think there's another important difference, which is that when gay people come out as gay, there's no implication that straight people are wrong to be straight. But when we come out as atheists, there is an implication that you're wrong to be a religious believer. There's no way to say, I don't believe in God, without implying, if you do believe in God, you're mistaken. So that's an important difference. But that being said, and I think there are differences and that we have to pay attention to them. But no, I think that there's a lot of parallels. And, you know, one of the most important parallels is that one of the things that makes it easier for gays and lesbians and bisexuals and transgendered people to come out of the closet is having a community, having a supportive community, and also having a community that's done work to gain mainstream acceptance in the larger world. And so I think that that's, you know, and I think a lot of atheists are very aware of this and are working on creating atheist communities, both online and in person, because that's what's going to make it easier for people to come out of the closet. Because when you do, I mean, it's true, when you come out as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, or when you come out as atheist, you're likely to lose your family, you're likely to lose your friends temporarily, and in some cases permanently. Even if you don't lose them, even if they don't totally alienate you, things may be strained, things may be difficult. It can cause rifts in relationships. You can risk losing your job, you can risk your physical safety. And therefore, it's important that we build a community to sort of be a safety net for people when they come out.
Well, you're leading into my next question, so it's like you read my mind. Talking here with Greta Christina, I heard you mention this once, and I want to address it now, where we as non-believers we get defensive when someone says we're angry, like, no, we're not angry. No, we're not angry people. In many cases, one of our first reflexes is to try to equivocate and say, no, I'm really a happy person. And you think there are times when we need to own it. Sometimes it's time to get good and pissed off. And you wrote a book called Why Are You Atheists So Angry? 99 Things That Piss Off the Godless. So let's talk about getting mad.
Well, the first thing I would say to what you just said is I think that we can be angry and also be happy. I don't think that those two things are in contradiction. Most of the time I'm a very happy person. I do pretty well in my life. I have a good marriage. I have friends that I'm close to. I have work that I love. I live in this city that just makes me happy every single day. And, so I feel very happy and I feel very fortunate. At the same time, there are things that I'm angry about. And I think that's part of being an emotionally healthy person, is being willing to be angry when there's real harm being done. I don't want to be complacent about harm that's being done. I certainly don't want to be passive about harm that's being done to me. And I don't want to be complacent about harm and injustice that's done to other people. I feel that, when terrible things are happening in the world, anger is an appropriate response. And I also think that when you look at the history of other social change movements, what you see is that anger is a tremendously important driving force. When you look at the history we were talking about the LGBT movement, the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, the labor movement, and so on, what you see is that these movements are driven by a lot of anger. And and what you also see, again, when you look at the history of these movements, is that when these movements start to gain some real power and start to get some traction, you see their opponents starting to fearmonger about how angry they are. And I think that that's what we're starting to see with atheists. It's a way of shutting down what we're saying. And it's a way of shutting down our very legitimate expressions of outrage at the harm that's done by religion.
At Skepticon 4, Greta Christina gave a speech by that very title, Why Are You Atheists So Angry? Here's a clip right here.
Does anger about religion help or hurt our cause? I will acknowledge, and I will freely acknowledge, that anger is a difficult tool in a social change movement. It's even a dangerous one. Anger can make people act rashly. Anger can make it harder to think clearly. Anger can make people treat potential allies as enemies. Anger can sort of fuel tribalism. And in the worst case scenario, anger can lead to violence. Anger can screw up. And very contrary to popular opinion, psychological research shows that expressing anger does not make people calmer and less angry. This is a myth. There's this myth about, if you get your anger out, you'll feel better, you'll be venting it. That's not true. Expressing anger actually makes us angrier. Part of why I'm up here today. But seriously, I don't want to be cavalier about anger. Anger is a difficult tool, and it is one that we need to be careful with. But all of that being said, yes, I think that anger in a social change movement is not only valid, but valuable and necessary. Why? Because anger is always necessary. Because anger has driven every major movement for social change that I am aware of. Anger has driven the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the queer rights movement, the feminist movement, the environmental movement. Every single one of these movements has had as a tremendous driving force a tremendous amount of anger. Anger about injustice, anger about mistreatment and brutality, anger about helplessness. We need to be very clear about this. Anger is not violence. Anger is not bigotry. Anger is not hatred. I'm not in favor of any of those things, but that's not what anger is. Anger is an emotion indicating displeasure and antagonism with a state of affairs. Anger is one of the ways that we know that things are not okay. Anger is how we know that people are being hurt unnecessarily. Anger is how we know that there's injustice in the world. And anger is how we know this not just in our heads, but in our hearts. And anger is what motivates us to do something about it.
So we look at the damage religion is doing, and there are legitimate reasons for it. I mean, you look at the discrimination, you look at the indoctrination of children, you look at the influence in our political systems, you look at all of these things, and it is pretty easy to get your blood up. And we can, from your perspective, we can use that, channel that in a way that is constructive. We're not raging. We're not out there just flailing and absolutely out of control. We are channeling that into constructive solutions, constructive counters against the religious tide.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that that's very important to remember about anger is, I do think anger is hugely important in any social change movement, and it's also just individually important. It's part of being emotionally healthy, to be angry when there's something terrible happening, but it's then important to take appropriate action. And if you're just sitting there raging in your living room, that's not really constructive. And a lot of times people ask me, well, what do you think we should do with this anger? And honestly, I think people should do what they're inspired to do. I mean, within reason. I don't, I do think that it's, obviously I don't advocate violence. I don't advocate anything hatred or bigotry or anything like that. But if what you're inspired to do by your anger against religion is to try to persuade people out of religion and support separation of church and state and oppose religious incursions into government and picket the Catholic Church because they're trying to ban birth control and picket the Mormon Church because they're trying to ban same-sex marriage and so on. If this is what you're inspired to do, if you're inspired by your anger at religion to really oppose religion, then by all means do that. On the other hand, if what you're inspired to do by your anger about religion is to try to build atheist community, to try to provide a safety net for people who want to leave religion, if your anger comes out of compassion, and I think that that's something that's important to remember. Anger often comes out of compassion, and a lot of atheists' anger about religion, a lot of it is anger about harm that's done to atheists, but a huge amount of it is anger about harm that's being done to other religious believers. It's anger about what believers are doing to each other and about what they're doing to themselves. So if what you're inspired to do by your anger is to try to build community, to show up at your atheist meetup groups and do atheist blood drives and to have an atheist bowling league and, or even to just be visible, to be an out visible atheist in the world so that other people know that, hey, atheism is an option and atheists aren't all evil people and maybe I should question some of my own beliefs or at least stop being a jerk to atheists. I think that that's huge. And
have you ever been out there on, say, a state capitol steps with a picket sign? Have you ever been out there on the front lines?
That's not mostly my style, but yes, I have done a certain amount of that. I'm mostly not a street activist just because I'm not very social.
Well, you're doing fine here. I mean, geez, and you're a great communicator. But I've been to a few events, and we'll come to the Reason Rally in just a minute, which was really more of a positive thing. But I can see you probably out there hand in hand with any number of people standing up for human rights in some capacity. So I was just curious.
Yeah, no, I've done a certain amount of that. There was North Carolina. There was a big atheist event that was on the Capitol steps, and it was like a rally, and there was going to be a vote about same-sex marriage coming up soon, and so sort of this this is a big rally that was a rally to try to get people to do activism about this, and so I've done a certain amount of that. I do it when when I really feel it's important. Again, part of the issue for me is that I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there's not a huge amount here locally of stuff to be protesting against. The church doesn't have much of an incursion into government. It doesn't have a huge amount of power over people's lives. And it's not that it's trivial, but it's not, I think that if I lived in another part of the country, I might be more inclined to do more street activism.
On March the 24th of 2012, you took the stage in the rain in front of 30,000 fellow freethinkers and pro-rationalists.
Yes.
Just Paint me a verbal picture about that day. You're backstage. They're about to announce your name. What's going on in your head?
Oh, that was such an amazing day. The Reason rally was just definitely stands out as one of the high points of my life. And it was terrifying. I've done a lot of public speaking in my life, but I've never spoken to a crowd that was that big. I've not even close. And so, of course, I was, very nervous. But I was also just so excited and so proud to be part of this. I mean, the Reason rally, I think, is going to be one of those things that gets written about in history books. I think when the history of atheism, of modern atheism, late 20th and 21st century atheism is written, I think that the Reason rally is going to be, a major chapter. And the fact that I had been invited to be part of it and to speak and to contribute to it in that way, I was just so honored, and I was just so moved, and it was so tremendously exciting to be part of that. And, it was like, we were all standing in the rain and it was freezing and it was like, gosh, it's been sunny all week long and why did it have to rain on this day? And yet I was also so proud of people. People just came out anyway and they stuck it out and they stayed all day in the rain because they wanted to be part of this moment in history. And there's not many times in your life where you really feel like, oh, I'm taking part in an important moment in history. And this was one of those moments. And it was hugely, I just felt enormously proud to be part of it.
I like to think that it was a watershed moment. I don't know if I'm trying to be too romantic about the day. It was the first time I'd ever hopped on a plane by myself to go out and be part of an event like this, sort of our Woodstock. And you're out there, but you're rubbing shoulders with people where those of us who are from hugely religious cultures, if we were to walk out with an atheist T-shirt on, I'm not exactly sure what would happen, but it would not be positive. It would not be pleasant. But up there, it's like you came home. It's like we were surrounded by people who get us, who don't judge us, who don't tell us we're broken for not believing in the invisible sky wizard. And I think that day spoke to the need for community that we in the free thought movement have. And many people are quick to reject community because they believe it is a surrendering of their individual personality. Look, I'm an individual. I'm not part of a herd. I'm not a sheep. I won't be part of a group. In your opinion, do you believe community is important? I'm guessing, yes?
I think community is hugely important. And certainly if there's any individuals who don't feel that way and who don't want it for themselves, that is absolutely their business. Is one of the things that I like about atheism is there's nobody who's telling you you're a bad person if you don't go to church or you're a bad person if you don't go to your local atheist meetup group. If that's not your thing, that's totally fine.
Well, I think the fear, though, is many people are afraid that any community is church. Look, if you gather as atheists, you just have atheist church. It's no different than religion. But there are major differences.
Well, I think there's major differences. And I think it's a little bit absurd to deny we're a social species. Human beings are a social species. If there was a, botanist, not a botanist, a zoologist from Mars who came down to observe animal species on Earth, they would say some species are social, some species are not. Humans are clearly a social species. And to deny that is a denial of reality. And I don't think atheists should be denying reality. And, we organize and form communities around all kinds of things. We organize, political organizations to get work done that we want. We organize around hobbies and shared interests. We organize around just the fact that, just random things like what college we went to or whatever. What kind of food we like. We're a social species and we form community. And I think that it's a little bit absurd to say that atheists shouldn't do that we shouldn't form community around this idea. Now, what I think a lot of what's happening is that, and this is something that, again, we learn sort of from the history of the LGBT movement, the people who tend to be the really early representatives of a social change movement, the people who come out first, tend to be people who aren't necessarily as social. They tend to be people who they don't care very much what people think of them, and they don't care about what, the opinion of their neighbors and so on. Those are the people who were able to come out as atheists first. And more power to them. That's hugely important. But the flip side of that is that I think that those people have a tendency to not understand how important community is to other people. Because they're kind of more loners, they're not as socially oriented as other people. They don't understand that society and community matters to a lot of people. And, the reality is that a lot of what religion provides for people is community. And, it's just, really practical, bare bones, down to earth things like it provides daycare. It provides counseling when people are having a hard time. It provides economic support when people are having a hard time economically. Provides networking, for social networking and career networking. It provides, if your kids are having a hard time, you've got a community to help them out and so on. And that's a lot of what religion provides, and also just society and company and people to have a good time with. And, it's a little different. Like if you live in some place like San Francisco or New York and you leave religion, there's a lot of secular opportunities and options for community. You can join the bowling league or, the Democratic Club or whatever. But if you live in the Bible Belt and you leave religion, you got nothing.
Welcome to my world, Greta. Welcome to my world.
And that's true for so many people. It's like in so much of the United States, all of community and all socializing, or most of it, is built around the church. If you want to have a bowling league, if you want to, do political organizing, if you want to do charitable work, if you want to do social justice work, it's all done around the churches. And when you leave the church, you're basically on your own unless there's an atheist community to provide those things and to provide, networking and counseling and support for your kids and, avenues for doing charitable work and so on.
Talking here with Greta Christina. If I may, I know you've gone through some health challenges. I'm just checking on you. How you doing?
Oh, thank you so much for asking about that. I'm doing better. I should, in case your listeners aren't familiar with this, in October of 2012, I was diagnosed with cancer. I was diagnosed with endometrial cancer, which is another name for uterine cancer. And I got very lucky. If there's a way to get cancer that's lucky, I got very lucky, which is that it was caught early. And they were able to treat it just with surgery, and I'm now cancer-free. I didn't have to have chemotherapy. I didn't have to have radiation. And I'm doing a lot better now, but it's not 100%. It's something that I wasn't quite prepared for when I had the surgery, was just how physically exhausting just surgery is. They put you under, they open you up, they take a major organ out, and they close you up again. That's physically traumatic. So I got about 90% better fairly quickly, and that last 10% is taking a little time. But I'm doing a lot better. I'm about 90% better, but that last 10% is being a little bit stubborn.
Again, not to get all Barbara Walters on you, but so you get the diagnosis. I mean, are you having those thoughts? You say the word cancer, even if it's in its earliest stages, do you have thoughts of mortality and all of those types of things go through your head? Yes, no?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if it's possible to get a cancer diagnosis and not have thoughts about mortality. And we didn't know right away, how serious the cancer was. It wasn't really until after the surgery that they could definitely tell me, yes, this was early. Yes, we got it all. So yes, no, that was extremely frightening. And again, we were talking about atheist community. One of the things that made that time easier for me, and certainly not easy, but easier, was the fact that I have been part of this atheist community for a long time, and therefore I've been talking with a lot of other people about atheist philosophies about mortality and atheist philosophies about death and atheist philosophies of how you deal with illness and trusting medical science and so on. That having that grounding in atheism and in humanism and in skepticism and in these philosophies about how you deal with hard times, how you deal with suffering, how you deal with illness, and how you deal with your own mortality. And the fact that, okay, I'm not going to die of this, but I'm going to die someday. And, And that's, I'm certainly not going to say that that's easy. I don't think that that's ever easy. I don't think it's easy for religious believers. But having this grounding in this humanist community and these humanist philosophies definitely made that go much, much better.
Well, if you're a cat lover too, recovery just goes a lot faster, doesn't it? I mean,
well, that's absolutely true.
Because I understand that you're a cat lover. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we have 3.
What are their names?
It's Comet, Talisker, and Houdini.
Well, I know a lot of people who either love cats or they hate cats, but I think if you hate a cat, you probably have the wrong cat. And there's just nothing like it. You're sitting on the couch and they come up and plop down in your lap and you hear that purring and they just sort of melt into your body and they're so warm. And before you know it, you just go to this place of, for lack of a better way of saying it, zen. You're just in this zen zone.
Absolutely. There's nothing, my wife Ingrid says nothing relaxes like a cat. And it's so much easier to be relaxed around a cat because they're just so boneless and happy and blissed out and also just hilariously entertaining. Ours chase each other around the house and it's wonderful.
This is I don't know why I'm tasking. Do you guys do like the little cat tower and all the little toys like we do or what?
Oh, yeah. No, we've got the cat condo, which they've shredded to pieces, of course. And, we've got the toys and the cardboard boxes that we can't put away because the cats love him and like to jump in and out of them and play in them. So, yeah, no, we're total suckers. We don't own them. They totally own us. Well,
I'm glad to hear that you're well, at least getting better. I mean, I know it's been a tough road, but seeing the outpouring of support and love and it's got to feel good to hear from so many voices saying we're rooting for you, we're ready to see you back on stage, we're pulling for you, we love you. That's got to be an incredible boon for you.
It is. It helps so much. Just this tremendous outpouring of support from the atheist community made such a difference. And it's given me, a sense that this is why community is important. It gives me a tremendous sense of being valued and being loved, and a sense of something to look forward to, something to work towards. I want to be working with this community again. And that was a lot of what got me really working through my recovery and doing the things that I needed to do to get myself better after the surgery, was feeling like I really want to get back in this. It's like, atheists, there's not universally, there's some of them who are obnoxious, but I'm not going to say atheists are universally wonderful people. But I really love this community and I love this movement, and it's just inspiring to me on a daily basis.
Talking here with Greta Christina. Now that you've got your second wind, what's next? What's the fire in your belly? What are you passionate about? What are you going to be speaking to this year and beyond?
I'm working on a collection of my erotic fiction. This is getting back to the sex topic we were talking about. I've been writing erotic fiction, aka porn, for many years, and I'm pulling together, just self-publishing an ebook, and probably going to do an audiobook as well, of my erotic fiction. And so I'm in the final stages of doing that, and the book is titled Bending and Other Dirty, Kinky Stories About Pain, Power, Religion, Unicorns, and More. And so I'm working on that, just in the final stages of putting that together. As far as atheist work, I'm also currently working on, and I'm very excited about this, I'm working on a coming out guide. Because coming out is one of the most important topics for atheists. It's really hard to do. How do you tell your family? How do you tell your friends, your coworkers? And so I've been gathering stories from people about their, how they came out and what worked and what didn't. And I've been looking at research about coming out and so on. And so I'm writing a guide called Coming Out Atheist, How to Do It, How to Help Each Other, and Why. And that's probably going to be coming out in the fall.
Stuff like what? A letter you might write to a family, or tactics you might take with other relatives or friends, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's, how to, exactly. It's, how, it's like, how do you break the ice? When should you decide to do it? What kinds of conversations should you have? What kinds of conversations should you not let yourself get sucked into? What to expect? Some of what I talk about is things like, make sure that your practical ducks are in a row. If you're coming out to your parents, don't do it when you're still living under their roof and they could cut you off. If you're coming out at work, maybe have a conversation with the HR department first. Let them know, hey, I'm going to be doing this, and if there's pushback, you should be prepared for it and get support. Find a supportive community before you come out so that if you do have problems, if you do lose your job or start getting harassment, you have people to support you and who can give you just emotional support and also give you practical support.
Well, if I may, you bring something up I want to draw a circle around really quickly. There are many who say, throw caution to the wind, and anyone who does not come out immediately and now and loudly is a coward. And I'm always a little bit astounded. I mean, it took me years to get to a point where I could even show my face.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there were personal issues, there were professional issues. I felt like I was playing chess, not checkers. I was really trying to navigate my way out. From what I'm hearing from you now, you agree that not everyone is at a point where they can shout it from the mountaintops. They need to essentially develop a strategy to get themselves in a place where it won't ruin their lives. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely accurate. And I think it's a mistake to say that, and I think it shows a certain lack of compassion to say, well, because I did it, therefore you can do it. Because you can do it, therefore you should do it. And if you don't do it, you're a coward. I think that's a mistake. Not everybody has the same life circumstances. And I think that trying to shame people into coming out, that's not very helpful. I think that we need to support each other in coming out. But part of that support is understanding that it's difficult and understanding that it's really personal and people have to do it on their own timetable and in their own way. I think it's certainly worth reminding each other, you know, coming out is probably in the long run going to make your life better. Even if you do alienate people, you're going to feel more authentic and have more integrity and not have this burden of secrecy on you all the time. And that is certainly a pattern that I've seen. And there's research that's shown that even when your worst fears are realized, coming out is still usually the right choice. But, you know, we have to do it on our own timetable. And, you know, we have to do it in a way that's not going to irrevocably screw up our lives. And, you know, there's always going to be a certain amount of risk. If you're going to wait till everything's perfectly safe, you're going to wait a really long time. But that whole risk-benefit question, that's very personal. And, you know, and it's not up to other people to shame other people because their life circumstances are such that they can't do what we've been able to do.
I have listeners all over the world, many of whom are being introduced to you and your work for the very first time. Is there a starting point for them if they wanted to find some of your work, your new book, what have you? Is there a blog or a website where they should contact?
Oh, well, the main thing is my blog. I blog at a place called Greta Christina's blog. And it was a really imaginative blog name, right? I clearly was missing, you know, fall asleep during the day that they taught how to give a clever name to your blog. But my blog is called Greta Christina's blog, and it's on the Free Thought Blogs network. You go to freethoughtblogs.com/Greta. That's a really good place to start. You know, I blog about all kinds of things. I blog about atheism. I blog about sexuality. I blog about politics. I blog about fashion. I blog about our cats. But another really good place to start is with the book. Why Are You Atheists So Angry? 99 Things That Piss Off the Godless. And it's available in practically every format there is. There's a print book, there's an ebook, and that's on Amazon and Nook and Smashwords. Everybody's got it. There's an audio book, which is available on Audible and iTunes and so on. So pretty much every format except maybe carrier pigeon, every format there is, you can get the book. And that's a lot of how people have found out about my work to begin with is through this book. And it's the book that does talk about why atheist anger is valid and what we're angry about and what it is that we can do about it.
I think it's an important message. It's certainly worth checking out. I encourage our listeners to do the same. She's angry, but she's also a pretty happy lady. Greta Christina, thank you so much for being a great guest on the podcast, and I hope we can do it again soon, okay?
I'd be delighted. Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.